We're live. So let me send over the link.
Okay, I am back.
All right, we're live.
Awesome. Just give me a second. Let me put up this link. Can you text me that link?
Don't know how to get it on my phone.
Let me just, okay, I'm just going to type it into my phone if you want to start talking.
We don't have anybody yet.
All right, post on yours. On, what do you call it?
Political debaters.
Yeah. I hate having saying broadcast live and then link in bio and then I have to run to my bio and then put it in before someone actually sees it and tries going to it. Oh my god.
We got one person watching, but I feel like that's either you or me.
Yeah. 13. Okay, sweet. Okay, so I have it up. If you want to go to the link in my on my page, you can just copy it into the link on your page. Okay. Hi. For everyone listening, which is no one, welcome to podcast number 2. Today we're going to be discussing a multitude of topics. We are also proud to announce our sponsorship with Kellogg's Pop-Tarts. Kellogg's, the brand that you use to eat food.
This isn't working.
Kellogg's brand. Also, oh, the link's not working? Or the podcast? Because
your sponsorship message isn't working.
Okay, hold on. I'm not good. I need to clean it up a little bit. Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to podcast number 2. You are joined by Asher and I, and today we're going to be discussing a multitude of topics. Before we get into that, however, I would like to announce something very big for our page. We want to announce a sponsorship deal that we actually have reached with Kellogg's brand. So if you do hear a couple Kellogg's advertisements throughout our streams from now on, just know that it is a sponsorship that we have. And we, it's the way that we can pay because we both do have children, and that this is the only way that we can support ourselves. So please don't hate it. If you're on TV and you see ads, it's the same concept. So, if you hear it every 5, 10, 2 minutes, just keep in mind that, it's helping us grow. So maybe one day we can have a little bit less successful podcast.
Now, this podcast especially brought to you by none other than Tony the Tiger himself from Kellogg's.
Tony the Tiger. They're great.
Oh my gosh. All right. So let's get serious. Before we actually dive into anything, I kind of want to address the direction of the page. So this isn't any new news, but yeah, so this isn't any new news. I'm pretty sure you guys all know. But we have been, for the most part, we have been pretty inactive on this page. And for that, I have to apologize. We've all just been super busy, just kind of getting back into the groove of school, getting prepared for all of that. But we're going to start doing this back up again once we start kind of getting used to our schedules once again. But there are going to be some changes to the debate. So something that I want to announce is that these podcasts we're probably going to do pretty often. Whenever something pretty big happens around that's worth talking about. These podcasts will probably be up. However, in terms of debates, we're probably going to be running either one or two, and they're going to one or two per week. And they're going to be categorized into either partial debates or full debates. Now, an example of the full debates is something you saw in our first debate, which ran about 2 hours, consisting of a variety of topics. But these partial debates is going to be much better for everyone's schedule, quite honestly. We're going to be talking about maybe up to 3 topics at most. But, these 3 topics are still going to allow for a lot of discussion, a lot of great debate. So you guys don't have to worry about, in terms of content, the quality going down. We still do have the list of debaters that are going to be coming on next. So if you applied for a debate, you don't have to worry. You're going to get on stage soon. Mm-hmm. So I think that pretty much covers stuff around the page. So we can dive right into the news. So let's talk about Barcelona. Let's talk about Barcelona. Yeah. That's big news. There's 14 dead and at least 100 injured in the terrorist attack that happened in Barcelona on Thursday. Mm-hmm. Extremely devastating, very sad. I read about a Las Vegas couple that went to celebrate their I believe it was their marriage, right, or their anniversary or something like that. Yeah. And it was quite devastating. This is honestly, it's unacceptable. It's terrible. It's quite terrible what's happening. But for those of you guys that don't know, the Barcelona attacks were kind of a chain of attacks. So there's a explosion on Wednesday night, and then on Thursday there was a van attack that ended up being directly linked to the 14 people dead. So I mean, ISIS has taken responsibility, I believe, for the attacks. John, I mean, do you have anything on this? It's wow.
Well, it's really interesting. This is the first terror attack in Spain since the 2004 Madrid bombings. And that's really interesting because of the Madrid bombings that occurred. That was 192 deaths when they bombed trains. So it was a very large bombing in Spain. So this is the largest terrorist attack they've had since. And, it's really interesting because, there's a lot of politics going on around the world, whether it be with the United States and North Korea or just politics with any other country. And it seems, I hate to phrase it like this, but it seems like these terrorist attacks have just become a, central part of life where after, the response to them, other than people saying, pray for whatever country, there's no legislative response. There's no real response by any government. It's come to a point where it's like, we're just going to keep fighting our war in the Middle East. And you know what? We're not going to really pass anything that's going to change the situation. And, it's so interesting how, these terrorist attacks just become more and more frequent, and it just starts killing people. And so just to give a perspective, since the beginning of 2017, here I have a list. It's from Wikipedia, and it has over 424 deaths related to terrorism of all kinds. And, whether it be in France, a machete attack, hand grenades. I'm just reading through some of these suicide bombings. Yep. Using a military helicopter. Once again, suicide bombers. People using different, convoy, people using different weapons. I mean, from the UK to Egypt to France to Russia, there's just so much chaos. And every year it just gets more and more. It just continues to increase. And it's ridiculous if you see the numbers. You would think that a lot of these attacks don't happen. And, we don't really hear about a lot of them. But if you look, there's been hundreds of deaths alone this year from Afghanistan. It's insane.
Yeah, and I think that right now, let's be honest. Right now, we have ISIS on its toes. If we take a look back at, like you mentioned, the 2015 attack, or I don't think you mentioned this actually, but the 2015 attacks in Paris, that was a major one that ISIS took responsibility for. And you take look at all these kind of attacks that have kind of been taking place. But if you consider the amount of attacks that have happened in maybe the past 5 or 6 months, you can kind of make the conclusion that ISIS hasn't been very active, and I think this is directly linked to these global powers taking a stance against ISIS. Russia and the United States specifically, they've been doing their best, and even France as well. They've been doing their best in order to get rid of ISIS and do everything they can in order to bring ISIS to an end. And I think right now they're kind of on their toes. Each leader that gets appointed to ISIS, they keep getting murdered by global powers. And so I think right now ISIS is just kind of throwing a Hail Mary, trying to prove their point as best as they can while their organization is still relevant. But something I think that we should discuss is what exactly is the point that ISIS is trying to prove. I think through all these terror attacks, through all these statements that they've released, through all these beheadings, all these terrible things that they've done, through all of them, I think that it's very unclear what exactly the purpose of ISIS is, what exactly this organization is fighting for. And so this senior police officer, Joseph Shapiro, in a news conference said it was clearly a terror attack intended to kill as many people as possible. Now, as of now, there isn't exactly any sort of news or any sort of insight into what exactly the purpose this was, what exactly the message or the symbolization that they were trying to prove here was. And so we have to kind of consider, is this still a religious expedition, or is it come to more so of like of just a completely just gang related terrorist organization? I think that's the message that ISIS is trying to send is completely it's completely unclear. I guess is the right word, but I mean.
And, I think that this difference that we're seeing is due in part because of the destabilization of ISIS in the Middle East. And I was listening to the news, and I heard something about how ISIS, because of the damage that they've, had over the past couple of years and even over the past couple of months from world powers, they've started, instead of fighting the war in the Middle East, they've started fighting abroad through cyber terrorism, trying to recruit people to do to commit these terror attacks and these atrocities in different countries, right? So it's it's interesting what you're saying, how it's taking on a new approach of it's no longer just about the land control, but it's about the control that they have on in persuading other people to commit these violent acts. And whether or not you agree with the organization, which I hope you don't agree with it, but whether or not you agree with it, it's working. And I think that the question that's posed now is, how do we stop people? How do we stop these homegrown terrorists? How do we stop these individuals from, growing up away from the fighting, yet they're still raised and they still commit jihad?
Right. And, this, there was I'm reading off of the Metro, which is a UK based, news organization. They say that following an attack, an ISIS supporting Twitter account reportedly celebrated the atrocity of writing, "To all Spanish people, the time has now come to pay for everything that your government has done to innocent people in our countries." And this has kind of been the underlying message, the common denominator in the previous organizations that we've saw. So we see Al Qaeda, ISIS, et cetera, and going beyond, multiple terrorist organizations. A lot of these terrorist organizations are committing these atrocities because in the attempt to get revenge at a certain government for past mistreatments of their government. So let's talk about this. So we've mentioned the government has to take a stand. You mentioned earlier that it's important to pray for them and all, right? But send out our thoughts, prayers, and all that. And show our support for them all. But you said that we should be. This is something that you posted on your Never mind. So this is something that I think you mentioned earlier, in the sense that that we should be going above and beyond and contacting, senators, contacting government officials, telling them that this is important and that this needs to be addressed, in order to protect attacks from happening inside United States soil. So let's talk about that. These terrorist organizations, their message, one of their messages is to punish a group of people for the actions that their government has done. And so, what exactly can the government do without triggering these terrorist organizations? Can we do anything actually? Is there any viable solution to this all? What do you think?
It's a really tough question because, terrorism isn't something new to us. We've been fighting
Yeah.
it for almost 30 years, right? And we've continued to see it, adapt to the changes that it has been presented. When we eliminate one, another one pops up. I think that the first step into getting rid of terror is, because it's this fundamental ideology that is driving this terrorism, right? And I personally feel that the way that we get rid of this terrorism is to target the ideology. Now, I think that I don't always agree with what people on the left may say, and I don't agree with Bernie Sanders when he says that the reason why those in the Middle East, those terrorists are agitated is because of global warming. I don't agree with that. But what I may agree with on the left a little bit is that, it's not always warfare, but it can sometimes be education that can help. Because, look, the ideology will be continue to pass on from generation to generation, right? And, I do agree in warfare because, if a foreign entity attacks our country, we have obvious justification to attack them. But I do feel that there needs to be emphasis on attempting to educate the populations of individuals so that when we go into the Middle East and we liberate these countries, it's not that we're just trying to implement a president and implement democracy. It's that we're trying to change the ideology so that we don't have generations continuing this harmful ideology. Because, there will always be people, right, who will oppose governments and will try to cause chaos and anarchy. But at the end of the day, we can limit that to a select few, not a large brass of people that will continue to commit these terrorist attacks over generations.
Right, and let's take a look at how inherently flawed the logic of these so-called religiously jihadist groups are. We take a look at ISIS, Al Qaeda, and all these Middle Eastern terrorist groups. A lot of the things that they say is, obviously the phrase Allahu Akbar, meaning praise God. And they carry out these attacks in the name of Allah. But something I want to address is it's completely, it honestly, like, it completely makes my blood boil. And it's completely not okay to contort and twist the meaning of religion, the message lying behind religion, and then use it for Islamic, not Islamic, but just in general for using these religious justification in order to carry out extremely unacceptable violent acts. There is a the I guess the main justification that comes from this is that I'm obviously not an expert on like Muslim religion, so if I do say something wrong, I do want to make it clear that it's not meant anything to offend you. This is just something that I know very briefly, but I do believe there is a section in the Quran that's pretty controversial in terms of how it's interpreted, and that's kind of the reasoning why these terrorist groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda use this justification, and it's like the phrase like eliminate your neighbors that like sin against you or something like that. There is a specific name for it, but I feel like it's completely inherently flawed, right? It's completely morally flawed. It's completely unacceptable that they're using a religious justification, a religious basis in order to carry out what they think is okay, what they think is the message of Allah. And let's take a look at the root of the word Islam. It literally translates to peace. So, I think there was a lot of debate about, you know, kind of the religion of Islam supporting and kind of advocating these terrorist attacks. I do have to disagree with that statement in the sense that I don't think it's necessarily the religion that's advocating it. I believe it's these psychopathic terrorists that are manipulating religion to justify their own acts. So
Right.
I feel like we shouldn't even give him the credit of referring to them as religious terrorist groups, because I mean, let's be honest, they're not religious. They're religious, but they're completely manipulating it and representing certain religions in an extremely inaccurate way. So
Right.
I mean, what do you think about this? It's the fact that these organizations are using religion as a basis of their attacks.
Right. Well, I have a philosophy that not one group in the world is good, right? Every group, whether it be racial or ethnic or religious, every group has flaws.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean,
And
like let's just take like a historical example. You take a look at the Crusades War, right? I mean, that's a pretty good example of Christians. I don't want to be shitting on Christians, but it's like an example. I think it's a relevant example to say that in the past, it's not just Muslim groups that have been committing these atrocities. In the past, it was also Christians. For example, in the Crusades, they're carrying out pretty similar religious I think purposes. But keep going with your point. I'm sorry.
That's fine. So, like I was saying, I personally have a philosophy that obviously, you agree with, that, all groups have flaws, right? And, when it comes to the national spotlight, when it comes to an international spotlight, when the flaws of one of these groups is revealed, whether it be a flaw across the whole group or just over a couple of people that are misrepresenting it, the flaw needs to be addressed, right? And
Right.
it doesn't just go for one religion or one race. It's just it has to be a general rule of thumb, right? So what happens is, and this is the problem why these atrocities continue, because when there's a white supremacist who carries out a terrorist attack, right? And let's say that 80% of white people condone it and the other 20% are too scared to, make their religion look bad. That's fundamentally wrong, because what you are doing is you're kind of looking at it from a vision of identity politics, and you're trying to conserve your own race or your own religion, when at the end of the day, you denouncing that and you saying, what, this is wrong, we have to fight it together, that's what's going to be, the way to stop it once and for all, right? And I think, as I said before, I think this is applied over many different groups, if all groups. So when an individual of one groups come out, I understand that if it has nothing to do with you and it's a terrible misrepresentation, and if there's hate coming from people as a result to it, it can be really difficult to say something about it, because of course it's in human nature to not make you it's in human nature, you don't want to make yourself look bad, right? So I feel that if there is a sense of urgency from groups when this occurs to denounce it and fight it together with individuals, that's going to be the first step. Once you admit the mistakes of a group of people you are in, whether or not you're related or not, you have to admit that mistake and say, we're going to fix this together. Because as much as you may not like it, that person is going to be associated with you. And there's going to be someone out there, and maybe a lot of someone's out there, that are not going to like you personally for the acts of someone else. So when people have something impact them, whether they're white or black or Jewish or Christian or Muslim, if something happens that reflects negatively on their party or their religion, whatever group they're in, they need to speak out against it. Because if it is something that's gauging this international or national spotlight, it's obviously something wrong. And when you don't admit the mistakes, then you're not going to fix the problem. And I think that's where it starts.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with that statement. That was perfectly said. And kind of adding on to that, I mean, ISIS in short, and a lot of terrorist groups in the past, is less a form of terrorism, right? But it's more of a collective crisis of consciousness. It's more of a collective flaw in the interpretation of religion. And so I think I agree with you in that point, whether it be religious purposes, racial purposes, something that negatively reflects upon a certain party, your party, or what you affiliate yourself with. it's important to speak out against that and condemn these attacks. And so maybe I think you're completely right. Maybe the key to defeating ISIS isn't exactly with the use of firepower. I mean, I think that proves it, right? I mean, we've been fighting ISIS with guns and bombs and all of that for so long, but yet and time again, we keep seeing these new leaders coming up again. We keep seeing these new terrorist attacks, and no matter what we do in terms of firepower, it doesn't seem like there's an end to it. But I think that I think you're completely right. We people from this group speak out against it. They rise up to the occasion, and I think it's more of an ideology. I think it's more of an ideology that that needs to be debunked rather than in terms of being gunned down.
Right. Okay. So let's move on. We've covered that for a little bit. It was interesting, talk about that. Before we move on, I just want to thank our sponsor in today's broadcast. Today's sponsor is if you're just joining us, we did say at the beginning of our podcast that we, in order to run this podcast, actually have sponsors now. So we just want to thank the Music Brazil YouTube channel for sponsoring us. So here's a taste of what you'd get with Music Brazil. Music Brazil on YouTube. YouTube.com/Music Brazil. Hold on. We have an audio clip. All of this and more on musicbrazil.com. Okay, so let's move on to our next topic.
Charlottesville, right?
Charlottesville, right. So let me open up on this. I think this ties directly right back into what we were saying, right? How, we have to take action for, what our group or what other groups do. And, just to, talk about Charlottesville, I think that a lot of bad things came out of it. And that's it. Like, I don't really think anything good came out of it. Obviously, it shows that there's hate groups on both sides, and I'd probably get crucified if I didn't say that. Obviously there are hate groups on the right? And we don't like those. But another interesting thing that I think is real unique to what happened to Charlottesville is that now there is this national like renaissance where these different statues of different leaders, whether they're Confederate, whether they are from different time periods, are being taken down in response to this influx of activity. And I personally feel that that's just an atrocity. So what are your thoughts on that?
Right. And actually, before we get into that, that's a great topic to talk about. I kind of want to talk about, you mentioned hate groups, and kind of the rise of this white supremacy, neo-Nazi, this atrocity, right? So, I mean, there's a statistic by the end of that CNN conducted, actually, by the end of Obama's presidency, 60% of Americans agreed that relations between the tensions between whites and African Americans were severely worsened since the election of Barack Obama into office. And so, if I were to predict right now, given, these white supremacy groups, BLM, Antifa, these violent groups, I think the percentage is much higher now. But so I think a lot of, I do kind of sympathize with both sides. I think that in general, I think this has been a terrible week for Donald Trump. But before we get into that, I think I sympathize with both parties in the sense that people are blaming Trump for this hate, but I don't think the origin of this hate came from Donald Trump. I think that this is kind of more of a thing that developed around Barack Obama's time. And so let's take a look at Antifa, Black Lives Matter. They're in theory they're genius groups, right? I mean they're groups promoting the lessening of racism and all that, but they do this oftentimes in means of violence, and they do this with by committing just violent acts, and so I think it's commonly taught in basically every history class that you'll ever take. Peaceful protest is one of the best ways to spread your message. That's why Gandhi was so popular. That's why Martin Luther King Jr. was so popular. But I think as we take a look at not just Black Lives Matter and Antifa, but we also take a look at white supremacist groups. They're not proving their message, right? They're not proving their message. They're not proving what they're trying to say. All they're effectively doing is that they're worsening tensions, and they're kind of leaving a bad impression on their representative groups. Right. So I think you were kind of diving into. I'm sorry, I totally forgot what you were going into.
So I was talking just a little bit about the backlash of these events where.
About destroying history, right?
Yeah.
So Mike, so I mean, is destroying history okay because of these movements? I don't think. I think it's completely not okay. I think by destroying history, I think by destroying these monuments, these statues, and by kind of eliminating these, what we're effectively doing is we're effectively being a different version of what Adolf Hitler did in Germany, right? I mean, he burned textbooks that was propaganda and kind of the bad things about himself, or didn't exactly represent what he believed in. And so the fact that the left is burning these historical monuments about the Confederacy, I think, is just inherently flawed, right? Because by eliminating this history from American knowledge, what we're effectively doing is we're setting ourselves up again for a potential another potential outcry such as this one, right? I think that history, no matter how bad it is, I think it should still be preserved, and I think it should still be taught, because history teaches a very great lesson, right? I mean, history teaches us the best lesson of all. We can learn from history, and we can develop from the lessons that we learn from history into becoming a better nation, into becoming a more developed nation, into becoming a more united party as a country. And so I think the fact that the left is going around destroying monuments, burning monuments, and all that is absolutely terrible. Like, I feel what they're saying. I totally feel what the message that they're trying to convey is these hate groups, they're not acceptable, and this and everything that's happened is just completely terrible. But I don't think that the left is approaching this in a very good way, in the sense that they're going around burning monuments and all that, because it inherently eliminates the opportunity for people to learn from history, right, and then become better from it.
And another grievance I have in reference to this topic is that it's a lot of hypocrisy on the right, because whether it's something that's being kind of like hypothetical, just kind of like joking around, or whether they're being truthful about it, people on the right have started to say, oh, if you're going to take down statues of Confederate individuals, you should take down monuments in the United States of anarchists, of Lenin, of different figures throughout history that are very left wing, that have caused a lot of grievances. And and I actually read something on Instagram today by The Scoop that one of these Lenin statues is actually going to be taken down by a city hall. And once again, it's just being counterintuitive, because the point of what's going on now isn't for the right to say, hey, you know what, if we're going to take down those statues, if you're going to take down those, we're going to take down your statues. That's not the point. The point is to say, these statues are a part of our history, right? Not only have in the recent years textbooks been rewritten to not include slavery, because there's a multitude of examples of textbooks either glossing over slavery or not talking about it at all, trying to rewrite history, right? Yeah. And so when you're getting rid of these Confederate statues, whether it's right-wing extremists or left-wing extremists, you're not actually benefiting anything. What you're doing is you're destroying history, and you're creating an Orwellian society where the past is being altered to meet the present. And look, I agree that obviously statues are erected, right, to maybe revere someone. And I understand that the grievances of the left may be, if there's a statue of a Confederate individual, that's obviously a concern. But what you have to understand is that a recent report by the Heritage Foundation found 4,000 to 6,000 active KKK/white supremacist members in the United States, right? 4,000 to 6,000. That's a very extremely small proportion of the United States citizens, right? Out of 300 million. So to say that having these Confederate statues is a broad representation of the United States in, whether it be institutionalized or ideologically, that we
Mhm.
support racism of any kind, that's a fallacy. That's just not true.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
look, and just to finish off, look, if there were tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands, and it was a growing movement, then maybe I could see some concern for that. But it's not a growing movement, right? If anything, it's decreasing over the
yeah.
years as the baby boomer and second baby boomer generation are dying out. So I don't see it as a concern. I see it as, look, these statues are here for a reason, right? It reminds us of the history. And the famous quote says, if you don't want to repeat history, you need to look at the past. That's not the actual quote. That was really garbage, but
um, yeah. So I mean, yeah, you mentioned that about baby boomers and all that. And that's very true. I can't recall the exact statistic, but I do believe there was like I think it was around like 92 or 93% of the white supremacist protesters that were present in Charlottesville, they were baby boomers in the second generation of baby boomers. And millennials only made up, I think, about 2%. And so I do agree with you that this institutionalized and this ideologic source of racism is dying down. I agree with you on that, but I do believe I understand the message that the left is trying to say, that racism is no place in this country, and I think it's also a message that the right is also trying to spread. Right? I mean, we condemn this act, we condemn racism, we condemn white supremacy, we condemn neo-Nazis, supportings, and all of that. But I do believe that these organizations are approaching the eradication of white supremacy in the wrong way. So I mean, let's be honest. White supremacy exists beyond the absence of statues, right? It's not like white supremacy is going to be completely eradicated as soon as you get rid of all these statues. That's just simply not true.
right.
The Antifa leftism exists in the presence of statues. So I mean, why are we talking about an event that wasn't about a Robert E. Lee statue at all? I mean, for example, why are we talking about an event? Why are we associating white supremacy and the idea of white supremacy with a Robert E. Lee statue? It's not like it's going to be eradicated once the Robert E. Lee statue is gone. And so I think it's kind of a controversy in that I agree with what many of these leftist organizations are saying, in terms of condemning racism and all that. And I do believe that's the overlapping message with conservatives. I think the left is completely misinterpreting what the conservative message is, in the sense that they believe that conservatives are all white supremacists and they're all racist and they're all Nazis. That's simply not true. So I totally forgot where I was going with this, but but I think that the left is completely is approaching this in a completely wrong way. And they're going after Confederate statues and Confederate monuments in the hopes that that's the first step into eliminating the idea of white supremacy. But the logic is completely flawed. An ideology doesn't go away with the simple destruction of a statue.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, it's just honestly, like, there's no other way to put it. I feel, that it's just simply ridiculous. The events, look, and we can all admit to the fact that when, a terrorist attack or a fundamentalist attack of any kind occurs, people on the side that are affected get emotional about it. And that can lead to, heightened political ideology, where people, are being more radical and, feel that something is going to be, making a difference. And what we have to understand is that, yes, these things occur and, they're terrible and we need to learn from them. But at the end of the day, we sometimes can't let our emotions get the best of us, because if we do, we're just going to be, not actually combating the issues at hand. We're just going to be continuing to spread hate and, just spread fear. And I just don't think that's really the objective of the United States or any country.
I mean, I think that the most common logical fallacy that the left has been doing is that the left has jumped to a debate about imagery, right, rather than a debate about philosophy. So it's
Mhm.
imagery versus
Yeah,
philosophy.
yeah,
And the philosophy doesn't disappear with the disappearance of imagery, right? I mean, the philosophy is always going to exist. Racism is always going to exist in the United States. But luckily, that sort of institutionalized racism is dying down, as you mentioned, with the death of baby boomers. So I mean, I think I think that the Confederate state statue removal is more of a local issue, right? Not necessarily a national one. And I think that these um, because I mean I believe that one of the underlying messages of the white supremacy rally was to tear down the Robert E. Lee statue. Um,
mhm.
but these broad national movements to get rid of local pieces of history are generally driven by political convenient impulses, right? And so I think if we're gonna have a real debate about Confederate statue removal, let's do it. But I don't think it's fair to lump all statue supporters or opposers into the realm of saints or the devils. I think that's just simply dishonest identity politics.
Right. Yeah. So on that topic, let's move on. With that being said, actually, before we move on, Christopher will ask a question. What about the satanic statues? They should be removed. Honestly, like I said, I may not personally agree with the statues, and I feel that whether you're right or left, if you advocate for the removal of one political spectrum statue but not yours, you're just being hypocritical. So to that, I'd say, look, if it's you know as long as it's not, I mean, I feel that it's a form of peaceful protest, right? So
Yeah.
as long as it's not a statue that's coming to life and hurting people, it's fine. So anyway, that's my thoughts on it. Let's move
Yeah.
on.
Well, I mean, I also want
Oh, yeah,
to
yeah, of
respond
course.
to that as well. I'm a Christian, and so I think what I'm about to say is I think you can eliminate bias from that. But so you mentioned, should satanic statues be removed? As much as I oppose them and as much as I want them to be removed, I don't think that it's necessarily fair to have them removed. All of our religious thoughts, all of our freedom of expression, and all of that is protected on the First Amendment. It's simply not fair to silence, let's say, the satanic religion, and then promote other religions. And so these satanic statues. I don't necessarily agree with them, but I don't think it's institutionally okay or acceptable to have them removed.
Right. Okay. So let's move on. Before we move on, I just want to talk about another sponsor we have, Kellogg's. Kellogg's Pop Tarts.
Tony the
Try
Tiger.
new Kellogg's Pop Tarts, strawberry Pop Tarts, summer style. Crave those crazy squares. Okay, let's move on. That's not a thing. Let's move on. We have I'd say about 15, a little bit over 15 minutes left. Before I want to go on to banning, because I just was story broke a couple hours ago. Let's talk about the solar eclipse. Let's bring some light to the conversation.
Yeah.
So, how are you excited for the solar eclipse?
Well, personally, I am a pretty big science guy. So I mean, solar eclipse, it's very fascinating. I'm probably going to be watching it. But yeah, I mean, not really much to talk about that. I mean, I'm pretty excited for it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this is really interesting, right? So where I live, it's occurring at about 2:30 p.m. Right, and we get out of school at 2:45. So
Oh,
what my school is doing is they're shortening our last period from noon to 2:45. It's usually 45 minutes, but now it's going to be almost 3 hours, right? Because they don't want any of us outside, even at the beginning of it during lunch. So
yeah.
we're not going to be able to see it at all. And our actual time getting out of school is till 3 o'clock, and any after school activities are going to go till 5 indoors. I mean, they do. I guess they don't want the liability of having to call home, call someone's parent and say, "Hey, your kid's blind," right? So and I honestly, like, I wouldn't have put it. I wouldn't put that above any of the kids at my school. I mean, I live in Florida. It's like a hick town. Some of the kids, like literally, it's like Confederate flags and like, anyway. So I'm really excited. Here's the problem. Smartphone cameras and DSLR cameras, you shouldn't take, actually not shouldn't, you don't take pictures with them because the light around the solar eclipse would be extremely detrimental. So the reason why the solar eclipse is a lot more damaging than looking at the normal sun is because a large majority, when the whole sun is exposed and you're staring at it, you know, a natural response by your eyes is, ow, stop looking at the sun, you're burning my retinas, you know, like that's what your brain tells you to do. When you're looking at a solar eclipse, you can look at it for hours, right? And what's going to happen is nothing. You're not going to feel anything. But that exposure, the corona on the edge of the sun, is still doing a lot of damage. And, you know, people can stare at it for a very little time and still wake up the next morning and have messed up vision for the rest of their life. And that's even true with cameras, right? So I, like, as we speak, you know, I'm trying to find a way to put something on my camera so I can get good pictures without, you know, destroying my lens or destroying my retinas.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, you can get like solar eclipse glasses for like $4 at Walmart. So like,
Yeah. So
why risk the possibility of going blind when you can watch the phenomenon for $4?
Right, exactly. And you know, okay, so another thing, I was just looking at this article. Someone actually took their glasses, right? Because I mean, there's solar filters you can buy, but the cheapest one on Amazon's like $50 and they go up to like 1,300, right? I'm not spending that much just for a one-time thing. Maybe it won't even get here in time. So apparently some people, they take to, because okay, so the reason what makes these solar glasses special is that they're 100 times the tint of regular glasses. So when you're wearing them, if you put them on, it's going to be pitch black. And if you're not looking at the solar eclipse, like if you're walking around your house, you're not going to be able to see anything. You're going to be like blind. What it does is that when you are staring at the eclipse, everything around is black except for the eclipse. So someone actually took their glasses, taped it to the front of their camera, and they took photos with it. So I don't know, that they're onto something. But
living in 3037, dude.
Yeah, like seriously. But like I need to figure out how the hell are they doing that, because oh my god, I need to find solar glasses. I mean,
dude, you can get them at 7-Eleven.
7-Eleven.
Yeah, I'm reading an article right now. 7-Eleven is stocking on solar eclipse glasses. Starting August 21st.
That's the day of it.
Yeah.
Wait, so why would they? Hold on.
Or you can. I know if there's a Walmart nearby, you can get one for like $3-4. So it's not really a problem.
Okay, hold on. As we speak, I'm texting someone. We need to go to Walmart. Okay, well that's good to know. So I mean, if anyone really cares, please don't burn your retinas out and blame it on us. Okay. So another thing, Christopher said, get yourself a piece of welding goggles. You don't want to do that. I read something about this. Welding goggles are not necessarily strong enough to defend your eyes. I would just go with the tinted glasses, because, like, you know, it's so interesting that, like, there's such a natural phenomenon that, like, has gone on for billions of years. And, like, I mean, honestly, how have, like, the people of this earth survived? Like, think about, like, I don't know, like, maybe 10,000 years ago, there was a solar eclipse, right? And just everyone's like, wow, what's going on? They just stared at the sun, and then like they all went blind, right? Like, how has the human species survived this national phenomenon? Because, like, I mean, humans are pretty stupid, right? So I don't know how they've like seriously like survived like getting hit in the eyes for centuries by, you know, solar eclipses. Man, it's surprising. Let me tell you.
Yeah. And I also, this is something from NASA, but basically, in terms of shades, how NASA categorizes them is that so it ranges from 1 to 14, right? 1 being the lightest shades, 14 being the darkest shades. Solar eclipse glasses are about 13 to 14. Welding goggles are on average usually only an 8. So you know, like you said, obviously, welding goggles might not be enough.
Yeah. Man, let me tell you, it's tough, really man. Interesting. Yeah.
It's tough living in this world.
You know, honestly, like, and see, like, I'm afraid because, like, I'm on eBay and I see like a pair for $150, and I'm thinking, how good can these things be? I may just buy like 5 and then just stack them on top of each other, just for extra protection. Oh my god, this is so sketchy. I mean, seriously, like, would you honestly trust, like, Oh my God. God. And
All
yeah,
right,
saying like okay. Anyway,
Steve Bannon.
yeah, Steve Bannon. What a guy. I mean,
What a
well,
guy. So so there's controversy on this issue. Right? I mean, Bannon claims that he's leaving voluntarily, and Trump's aides insist that he's being fired.
yeah,
Um,
basically.
so I mean, I guess that's kind of the basis on where the tension kind of arises. But I don't think that it necessarily matters that much. I think that Trump obviously sidelined Bannon in favor of a wide variety of characters ranging from Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, H.R. McMaster, and John Kelly, etc. And I think that Bannon's influence have just kind of been waned.
You know,
Um,
it's really honestly it's so interesting. What's going on in the past few days, and and not even in the past few days. Sorry, I'm just like losing track. What's gone on in the past few months? With different things in the Trump administration. Yeah, and just people going in and out. I mean, what do you think is the reason for that?
Reason for
You know, all these different individuals going in and out of the White House. I mean,
oh
you know,
yeah.
you know what I mean.
Um, I think personally, Trump doesn't necessarily relate with a specific political party. Obviously, he ran as a Republican, but a lot of Republicans will tell you that he misrepresents a lot of Republican values. And so, what a lot of people kind of are saying now is that, instead of being affiliated with a specific political party, he's more of an independent populist, right? And so, technically speaking, we've never had an independent president. But if you take a look at like the policies, maybe, and the things that Trump advocates, I think we can make a safe assumption that Trump is the first independent president that we've had. And I think that with his wide variety of policies, I think it's very difficult for him to find, staff members, people involved in the White House that represent his views as accurate as possible. And so I think that's the I think that's one of the main reasons why the White House has just kind of always just been shaken up all the time. But I
Yeah,
mean, it's
because I
weird,
mean,
right? I mean, it's
yeah,
really weird. Right? It's the first time in history that the White House has been kind of just been shuffling. So
yeah. I mean, and Steve Bannon him said, his first thing he said after leaving is, quote, if there's any confusion out there, let me clear it up. I'm leaving the White House and going to war for Trump against his opponents on Capitol Hill, in the media, and in corporate America.
hmm,
So, I don't think, like you talked about, he has a very wide range of policies, and I don't think that people necessarily hate him for it.
mhm.
But I think that they're like, you know what, I get it. This guy has different views for me. I may not be able to work with him, but I can definitely support his side.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, I think a lot of news sites are reporting this, but they're saying that Trump should be prepared for a war with Bannon.
Hmm.
With the Daily Wire reporting that Bannon is deeply vengeful, supremely ambitious, and he's going to be giving. And he already gave an insane interview with the American Prospect, about just foreign policy with Trump and all that, the administration. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's weird. I mean, I don't think that I think that I don't think the media knows enough about it, honestly. The kind of the inside stories of the White House and what exactly is happening. Um,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's so interesting.
Bannon's play for Trump's populist and alt right bases. I think is going to be partially successful if it does go into like a war.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see
But
how it plays out.
yeah,
So yeah, a lot of interesting stuff going on. So I'm gonna run out to get some solar glasses, so we can end the podcast a couple of minutes soon. But thank you to the 3 to 4 people that turned out for today's podcast. Once again, today's broadcast was brought to you by YouTube.com. YouTube, the #1 video sharing platform in the world. Use it or don't. YouTube.com. So thank you to everyone for watching. We appreciate it. And as always, actually, no, not as always.
What's that thing that that the dude? What's that movie? The one with Will Ferrell.
Oh, Anchorman.
Anchorman. What's the phrase that he ends with?
Anchorman ending
phrase. San
phrase. We have that.
You stay classy, San Diego.
Okay. Well, I doubt that the one person watching us is from San Diego, but if he is, you stay classy, San Diego. We'll see you next time. Okay, beautiful.